Mexico in flames. Massive protests have erupted all over the country this very weekend, even reaching the presidential palace itself. The protesters are demanding justice for a mayor who was brutally murdered, allegedly by the country's drug cartels. On the other hand, some are even calling for the resignation of the president herself. They label her as a narco-president and even accuse her of being connected to the case of Carlos Manzo. But what's actually happening in Mexico right now? Who is trying to set the whole country on fire and could even be trying to overthrow the government? Is it a genuine interest in the well-being of the local population? Or is it possible foreign intervention and therefore outside interests? Let's analyze it thoroughly and stay until the end, because the comparison between Mexico and other countries in the region is going to surprise you a lot. And it will also clarify many things about this issue. I'm Liu Sivaya, a geopolitical analyst at Red Random Buzz. Subscribe to this channel to stay up to date with the latest international news. And of course, to analyze it in depth. Let's begin. We'll start, as usual, from the beginning. The situation in Mexico is absolutely explosive. This very Saturday, intense protests have erupted in the country. The images speak for themselves. One thing to highlight is that the protests are being led in particular by the so-called Generation Z. That is, young people under 28 years old. They are demanding justice and denouncing the inaction of Claudia Sheinbaum's government, whom some of them even accuse of being connected to the murder of Carlos Manzo. The latter, a mayor who was very beloved by the people, an independent mayor, the first independent mayor of Uruapan, to be exact, who stood out especially for his fight against crime and organized crime. And yes, of course, therefore also against drug trafficking, which in fact is accused of being behind his murder. It also happened under very symbolic circumstances at the Festival of Candles, one of the most important celebrations in all of Mexico. On November 1st, he was murdered by unknown individuals who shot him several times. The crime itself is still under investigation, but it has caused a stir, and many within the country of Mexico, since the problem of drug trafficking and organized crime is in fact very much present nowadays. The participants in the massive marches this weekend, which I remind you, reached all the way to the presidential palace. They denounced Claudia Sheinbaum's complicity in these events and also called for her resignation. The Mexican presidency itself has spoken in terms of foreign intervention. So, to be more precise, the president of Mexico herself, Claudia Sheinbaum, has referred to these events as an initiative promoted, even from abroad, against the government. Could it really be the case? And who might have an interest in destabilizing Mexico, even from within? Let's take a look at it from now on. Sheinbaum's government has been very critical of several causes that characterize the Western world. For example, at one point, the president of Mexico refused to visit Volodymyr Zelensky, and, therefore, the Ukrainian cause directly in Kiev. She explained it by saying that she was there mainly to focus on the internal affairs of the country of Mexico, which, at first, was also promised by another of the likely members in this case. First, let's hear from the president herself.
But in all cases, well, we have relations with all countries, with a position that is based on our foreign policy defined in the Constitution. In my case, well, the main task is to govern Mexico. We will attend some international events that we consider important. For example, the president of Germany called us because he wants to come to Mexico. He wants to make a visit, and of course, we told him yes. So we are considering, for example, the G20, which is the first international activity that will take place in Brazil. Also with a friendly government with Lula, who is going to come to the inauguration. But we are not going to be traveling, nor are we going to make this a central issue.
Desire to defend the independence of Mexico, good relations with Brazil, and therefore, very particularly, with Lula da Silva. In addition, this adds, on my part, quite good relations with Gustavo Petro, another important figure in Latin America, and therefore, someone who might be bothered by Mexico's position. As of today, maybe you don't have to be too smart to see that the loose ends will eventually lead us directly to the United States. Yes, that's right. Here we're talking specifically about Donald Trump, who had several clashes with Mexico because of all kinds and sizes of incidents. He repeatedly brought up tariffs, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating. Then, he found himself trying to deport a number of Mexican immigrants, whom he claimed were extremely dangerous criminals, directly to Mexico, but without the president's consent. Claudia Sheinbaum. She was very clear back then, and Donald Trump even had to back down. And I imagine those words of hers are still resonating somewhere inside him.
The White House published an offensive, defamatory, and unfounded statement about the government of Mexico, which we categorically deny and strongly condemn. That's why we're being emphatic. There is no motive, reason, or justification to support this decision, which will affect our peoples and nations. We've said it differently. Cooperation and coordination, yes. Subordination and intervention, no. Mexico deserves respect.
Mexico deserves respect, and the United States must be obeyed, or at least, this is what the Trump administration is certain of. On one hand, then, among the possible reasons for destabilizing the situation in Mexico is how uncomfortable the current Mexican government is for the current United States administration, and very personally, Claudia Sheinbaum, who has already shown her absolute firmness on more than one occasion in the face of all kinds of threats and pressures from Trump personally and the United States in general. And this is where we should also mention at least two other particular reasons. First of all, dealing with interesting matters necessarily involves establishing alliances, one of which is quite strong and positive for that country. Wow, it turns out that it's with China, a country that is currently one of the first and main enemies of the United States. To this, we must add Claudia Sheinbaum's good relationship with other governments in the region, which hits Donald Trump like a punch in the gut. I'll mention Lula and Gustavo Petro again, both important, and perhaps others too. Second reason, no less important than the first. We have to talk about Venezuela again, where the United States is already preparing what it has called Operation Spear, the final preparations for which the new United States Secretary of War, Pete Gerson, announced just a few days ago. Yes, it seems the United States is determined to eventually attack Venezuela, and all signs point to that. We will probably dedicate a separate report to the fact that these will be massive attacks against strategic targets. And here, depending on how the Venezuelan regime acts, either they will decrease and become much more targeted, or the United States could be. It could even end up raising the tension of the situation further, trying to completely overthrow Maduro's regime. By the way, in these last few days, at times he's only talking about peace, about the...
President, are you concerned about possible aggression? We are busy with the people, governing with peace, with these young men building.
What is your message to the people of the United States?
President, let's unite for the peace of the continent. No more endless wars, no more unjust wars, no more Libya, no more...
Afghanistan. So it seems that the aggression from the United States doesn't really have much reason to exist, at least not as a result of any prior aggression from Venezuela. You see, in that country, what they want is peace. But in the United States, they are fixated on continuing to fight drug trafficking no matter what. This is a particularly important point that connects several countries in the region at the same time: Venezuela, Colombia, and of course, Mexico. What's going on, United? The United States has already been active in the region. It has attacked more than 20 boats coming precisely from these Latin American countries, mainly, of course, from Venezuela, killing people supposedly involved in drug trafficking, but who could actually be either drug traffickers or fishermen, and therefore blatantly disregarding the rules. Any presumption of innocence, without a prior trial or anything like it. To this, we still have to add other attacks that the United States is preparing against Venezuela, right at this very moment, because 8 warships, including the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, one of the most important and largest internationally, don't just gather off the coast of a country for no reason. In this way, attacking Mexico and trying to destabilize the situation inside the country by any means. It may not only be about actually wanting to take over Mexico itself, but also about influencing the Venezuelan issue. Because the fewer friends Venezuela has in the region, the easier and faster it will be for the United States to carry out an operation. But of course, I repeat, here the main slogan is the fight against drug trafficking, which to the average person sounds like one of the most just causes in the world. However, this could be the context to unleash something like colonialism again. Do you remember September 11th and how things were afterwards? The United States used this event as an excuse, which clearly happened under extremely strange circumstances, to justify future attacks on the territory of other countries and even full military interventions, such as in Afghanistan, with absolutely devastating consequences. Devastating for everyone. And yes, there too, the United States acted as the world's savior, claiming to protect its own interests as well as the freedoms and democracies of the entire world. Now we're back to a very similar point, looking for weapons of mass destruction and waving little vials with who knows what substance inside. It's already known that going to the United Nations doesn't work, and people in the United States know it too, so an investigation is needed. Facing another excuse, their own security in the eyes of the whole world. We are fighting drug trafficking because right now it's hitting the United States harder than ever. Correct. We're fighting drug trafficking because we need some excuse to keep trying to maintain our international hegemony and to ensure access to some very lucrative resources, especially highlighting the fact that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. When defending a noble cause, any tool is acceptable, and the United States knows this well. However, a few months ago, particularly in February 2025, it started from afar by declaring the main drug cartels of several countries as terrorist organizations at the same time. Here we must mention Mexico and the main cartels of that country, as well as Venezuela, and the organizations now considered terrorist by the United States, such as Tren de Aragua and the Cartel of the Suns. The latter, according to the Venezuelan government, is a complete phantom. The Cartel of the Suns, they claim from Venezuela, it's made up. I don't know how many years ago they invented that, and in that time it's had like 300 bosses. Every time someone bothers them, they make them the boss of the Cartel of the Suns. This is how the Venezuelan Minister of Interior and Justice, Diosdado Cabello, expressed himself in August. Both he and Nicolás Maduro, by the way, are accused by the United States of being leaders of this extremely dangerous Cartel of the Suns. They, in turn, respond that this is being done with a very clear intention of eliminating them and therefore ultimately taking control of Venezuelan resources. Be that as it may, this, declaring something as a terrorist organization, and therefore ultimately attacking it in defense of United States interests. It's something that, I repeat, we've already experienced with September 11th, and it could indeed happen again, also in Latin America, given the current circumstances. And so, labeling those cartels as terrorist organizations would indeed make perfect sense. And of course, under these circumstances, the death of one of the most beloved mayors of the Mexican people, who was precisely fighting against drug trafficking, as a symbol of the fight against what the opposition and also the protesters this weekend claim could represent the government of Mexico, which is practically a direct relationship with those who cold-bloodedly murdered Carlos Manso. Well, the truth is that this serves as a perfect excuse for the United States when it comes to weakening the internal situation in the country. And it could be that in the future, they might even take control of it. Controlling Mexico, all while defending the most noble, clearly just cause of the fight against drug trafficking. And as the cherry on top, taking control of Venezuelan resources that could get the already absolutely battered country out of trouble. At this point in the story of the United States economy, The plan sounds like a tremendous bargain. Whether it's actually happening or not is another matter. I'll leave that for each of you to answer for yourselves. Given the thorough analysis of the situation across the region, above all, the United States' position as an international hegemon is now extremely weakened. And its desire, of course, to regain the control it previously had over practically the entire globe. They will serve as support for us when analyzing the upcoming tensions that may arise in Latin America. Because I repeat, something tells me that what we are experiencing right now is just the beginning.